The first morning, my 9-year-old granddaughter stayed at my house. I set a plate of warm pancakes and several strips of bacon in front of her, and thought I was simply making an ordinary breakfast. But Lily did not react with the excitement I expected. She immediately shrank back in her chair, gripping the hem of her shirt with both hands, while staring at the food for so long that I began to feel uneasy. A few seconds later, tears were running down her cheeks. She asked whether she would get in trouble if she ate all of it, then hurried to explain that she could eat only a little, save the rest for lunch, and try not to cost me too much money. I had lived for 70 years, dealt with countless problems throughout my career, and always believed I had enough experience to recognize when something was wrong. Yet that morning, standing in my quiet kitchen, it took me several moments to understand the frightening truth in front of me. My granddaughter was not afraid of me. She was afraid of being hungry, because somewhere before she entered my home, someone had taught her that eating was a privilege, and that every bite she received could make her a burden. My name is Leonard Hayes, although everyone in my family has called me Len for years. I was 70 years old and retired after more than 4 decades as a logistics manager for a large distribution company in Ohio. The job never made me wealthy, but it gave me a stable life, a house that was fully paid off, enough savings to live comfortably, and, more importantly, a habit of paying attention whenever things did not add up. In logistics, one incorrect number on an inventory sheet might be nothing more than a typing mistake, but it could also point to a missing shipment, a false invoice, or a much larger problem somebody was trying to hide. I had spent hours tracing discrepancies worth only a few $1,000s and discovered more than once that something small could lead to a chain of wrongdoing. After retirement, I thought I had left those years of examining every detail behind me, but that habit ultimately helped me recognize that what my son was saying and what I was seeing in my granddaughter could not both be true. Dennis was my only son. He was 45, had been married to Patty for more than 10 years, and they had a 9-year-old daughter named Lily. I used to believe Dennis had built a much better life than I had at the same age. He owned a modern house in an expensive neighborhood, drove beautiful cars, wore expensive clothes, and always presented himself like a man who was succeeding. I never asked too much about his income or finances because I believed a grown man had the right to manage his own affairs, and Dennis had never acted as if he needed help. He often talked about new contracts, important clients, business dinners, and opportunities that I did not fully understand. Whenever I asked whether everything was going well, he always said business was demanding but strong, so I had little reason to believe otherwise. Lily was different. I loved that girl, but the truth was that I did not see her as often as I wanted. Dennis lived nearly an hour away, and always said the family schedule was busy. I usually saw Lily on holidays, certain weekends, or during the occasional visit when Dennis dropped her off for a few hours. She was always quiet, polite, and somewhat cautious. She was not one of those children who ran through the room demanding attention. Most of the time, she sat in a corner with a book or quietly watched the adults talk. I used to think she was simply shy, perhaps, taking after her mother more than her father. Only later did I understand that her silence was not entirely part of her personality. Lily had learned to watch adults' expressions before speaking. She had learned not to ask for too much. She had learned that attracting attention could bring consequences she wanted to avoid. 2 days before Lily came to my house, Dennis called and asked if I could take care of her for 5 days. His voice sounded more strained than usual. He said work had run into serious trouble. Several investments had gone badly. Some clients were delaying payments, and he and Patty needed to fly out to meet business partners in an attempt to stabilize their finances. According to Dennis, the trip could determine whether the family made it through a difficult financial period. I asked whether things had become bad enough that he needed money from me, but he immediately said it had not come to that. All he needed was for me to watch Lily, so he and Patty could focus on fixing the business situation. I agreed almost immediately. Looking after my granddaughter for 5 days was not a sacrifice. If anything, I was happy to have more time with her. The afternoon before that breakfast, Dennis pulled into my driveway in a brand new black luxury SUV. I knew he had recently changed vehicles, but it was the first time I had looked closely at it. The body was polished enough to reflect the trees along my yard. The interior had pale leather seats, and everything about it suggested that it was not the kind of vehicle purchased by somebody who was counting every dollar. Dennis stepped out wearing a designer jacket, tailored pants, almost new leather shoes, and a gold watch. I remembered him telling me he had waited months to buy. Looking at my son, no reasonable person would have guessed he was in the middle of the kind of financial emergency he had described over the phone. Then Lily climbed out of the other side of the SUV, and the contrast between father and daughter caught my attention immediately. Her t-shirt was old and too tight across her shoulders, her jeans stopped above her ankles, and her sneakers were worn so badly that the right toe was beginning to separate from the sole. I looked down at her shoes and asked Dennis why he had not bought her a new pair. He shrugged and told me children grew too fast, so spending good money on clothes and shoes was practically throwing it away because they would outgrow everything within months. The answer bothered me, but at the time I still thought perhaps Dennis really was cutting unnecessary expenses because of the financial problems he had described. Almost immediately, he began complaining about money. Dennis said debt was piling up, housing costs had gone up, insurance had gone up, school expenses had increased, and everything connected to raising a child seemed to drain his bank account. He said this trip could determine the future of the family, because if he could not convince certain partners to continue working with him, they could be in serious trouble. I asked again whether he needed a short-term loan. Dennis said he did not, but then, with Lily standing right there, he added that the cost of taking care of her alone had become a serious financial burden. I looked at my granddaughter and saw her lower her eyes. She had heard every word. I told Dennis he should not speak about his daughter that way in front of her. He sighed and said, "I did not live with a child every day, so I did not understand what it was like to keep paying for food, clothes, school, medication, and 100 other things." I reminded him that those things were the responsibility of a parent, not a debt a child should feel guilty for creating. Dennis clearly did not want to keep arguing. He handed me Lily's small travel bag, told her to behave and not make things too difficult for Grandpa, while Patty stepped out of the SUV only briefly, gave Lily a quick hug, and said they were already running late. I remember standing beside Lily as the SUV disappeared down the road. She did not run after it, wave for long, or ask when her parents would be coming back. She simply watched the vehicle vanish, and then asked where she should put her bag. I thought that was a little unusual, but I still did not attach anything serious to it. Children react to separation in different ways, and I did not want to invent meaning where there might not be any. That evening, I made spaghetti. Lily ate very little. When I offered her another serving, she shook her head immediately and said she was full, even though most of the food remained on her plate. I assumed she was not used to my cooking, or simply was not hungry, so I did not push her. After dinner, she asked if she could wash the dishes, even though I told her she did not have to, then quietly arranged her things in the guest room and went to bed early. From the outside, everything still looked like a slightly shy child spending a few days with her grandfather. I did not think much more about it until the pancakes the following morning changed the entire picture. After Lily started crying, I pulled a chair next to her and told her that everything on the table was for her. She still asked whether I was sure, and only after I promised that nobody in my house would get angry because she was hungry did she cautiously pick up her fork. I noticed how she cut the pancake into tiny pieces, chewed slowly, and kept glancing at me as if she were waiting for some signal that it was time to stop. A child might eat slowly because she dislikes the food, but there was no disgust in Lily's expression. What I saw was vigilance. She seemed to be calculating how far she could go before the adult in the room changed his mind. I asked what she usually ate for breakfast at home. Lily stayed quiet for a long time before answering. She told me Patty weighed her food on a digital kitchen scale. I asked whether a doctor had told them to control her portions. Lily shook her head and explained that her mother simply wanted to make sure she did not eat too much. Some mornings, she got only a slice of dry bread. Other mornings, she was allowed a little leftover cereal or some food from the night before. If she finished and was still hungry, Patty told her to drink water and wait until the next meal. I kept my voice calm because I did not want Lily to think she had done something wrong by telling me. Then I asked why Patty restricted her food. The answer felt like a weight dropping into my stomach. Lily said her parents often told her food cost money, that she already cost the family too much, and that if she were grateful, she would learn to eat less. Dennis had repeatedly called his daughter a financial burden, while Patty called her a freeloader and ungrateful. Whenever she said she was still hungry, it was clear those comments had not happened once or twice in a moment of anger. Lily repeated them in the flat, matter-of-fact tone of a child who had heard them so often that she had begun to believe they were simply facts about herself. I asked whether Dennis and Patty ate the same way. Lily shook her head. She told me her parents still ordered food from restaurants, that the refrigerator often contained expensive items, and that they sometimes hosted dinners for friends. Food was not absent from the house. Most of it simply was not meant for her. Lily was allowed whatever portion had been weighed out or whatever her parents no longer wanted. If she took something else because she was hungry, Patty would notice and remind her that she was spending adult money. The more I listened, the less I could reconcile that story with the image of Dennis stepping out of a new luxury SUV the day before. A family can be in debt while still trying to maintain a wealthy appearance. That happens. But even in that situation, a father buying expensive watches and new cars while letting his daughter wear clothes that no longer fit, worn-out shoes, and survive on dry bread is no longer about saving money. It is a choice. Dennis was choosing his own lifestyle over Lily's basic needs, and worse, he was teaching a 9-year-old child to believe that she was the reason for the family's problems. I asked what happened if she said she was still hungry after dinner. Lily told me Patty usually made her drink a large glass of water and go to bed. Once, Lily had secretly taken a slice of bread because she was so hungry, but Patty caught her and gave her a long lecture about stealing food in her own house. Dennis later told her she needed to learn gratitude because she had a roof over her head and parents willing to pay for her life. I had to keep reminding myself not to react too strongly, because if I became openly furious, Lily might believe she had caused trouble for her parents and shut down completely. So I asked gently whether she had ever told a teacher, doctor, or another adult. Lily shook her head. Patty had told her many times that family matters were private, while Dennis warned that if other people misunderstood the situation, Lily herself would be the one who suffered the consequences. She did not explain what those consequences were, and I did not force a 9-year-old child to describe something that already frightened her. The fact that she believed telling the truth could bring punishment was enough. When Lily finished the first pancake, she stared at the second but did not touch it. I asked if she was full. She shook her head and asked whether she could save it for lunch because she was afraid there would be nothing later if she ate everything now. That question erased the last bit of doubt in my mind. A child does not naturally develop the habit of saving food unless she has experienced uncertainty about when the next meal will come. I told Lily clearly that while she was staying with me, she would eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, and if she became hungry between meals, she could take food from the kitchen without asking permission. She stared at me for a long time, almost as if she were trying to decide whether this was a trick. Then she asked if I thought she was a burden. It took me a few seconds to answer, without letting the anger in my voice show. because that question revealed how completely Dennis and Patty had shaped the way she viewed herself. I told Lily she was 9 years old. Adults were responsible for making sure she was fed, clothed, safe, and cared for. Those things were not debts she had to repay. I wanted to call Dennis immediately, but my professional experience made me stop. When a situation contains too many inconsistencies, confronting the person involved too early often gives them time to invent a better story, destroy evidence, or temporarily change their behavior before anyone can look closely. I decided to stay quiet until I understood exactly what was happening. I did not expect the next piece of the truth to arrive only a few hours later, near noon. Lily was sitting in the living room, reading, when I heard her breathing change. At first I thought she was coughing, but within seconds there was a clear wheeze, and she brought one hand to her chest. I knew she had asthma, because I had seen Dennis carry an inhaler for her in the past. I rushed to the bag he had left and searched every compartment. There was no inhaler. I checked twice, then asked Lily where her medication was. She said her father might have left it at home because Patty had only packed a few clothes before they left. Fortunately, the asthma attack was not severe. I sat Lily upright, helped her slow her breathing, and after a while she began to stabilize. Still, I was not willing to keep an asthmatic child at my house for 5 days without medication. I called Dennis. No answer. I called Patty. No answer. I asked an older neighbor, whom Lily had met before, to sit with her for an hour, then told Lily I was going to get her medicine. I did not want to bring her back into her parents' home, especially when I had no idea what I might find there. Dennis lived in an upscale neighborhood where nearly every house was large, modern, and perfectly maintained. The lawns were evenly cut, the driveways were spotless, and the landscaping made the whole development resemble a real estate advertisement. When I unlocked Dennis's front door with the spare key he had given me for emergencies, the first thing I noticed was the contrast between his claims of financial trouble and the house around me. The living room had an expensive sectional, a massive television mounted on the wall, polished stone surfaces, and decorative pieces that were clearly not cheap. The kitchen had high-end appliances, including a large refrigerator and a coffee machine that probably cost more than my first used car. If this family was on the edge of financial collapse, there was no visible sign that Dennis and Patty had reduced their own standard of living. I searched the kitchen and downstairs bathroom for Lily's medication, but found nothing. As I walked through the hallway, something else began bothering me. There were photographs of Dennis and Patty everywhere, the two of them on beaches, at ski resorts, outside expensive restaurants, and dressed up at social events. But there were almost no photographs of Lily. I found one older family picture from when she was much younger, but most of the house looked like the home of a childless couple. I assumed perhaps Lily's photographs were in her own room. When I could not find the inhaler elsewhere, I went to the door at the end of the hall. At first, I thought I had opened a storage closet. The room was small, cold, and almost empty. A thin mattress lay directly on the floor. Beside it was an old blanket and a plastic bin containing a few clothes. There was no proper bed, no desk, no bookshelf, no toys, no pictures, and nothing that made the room look as if a 9-year-old girl actually lived there. I stepped inside and looked more closely. On the windowsill was a plastic cup holding a few dull pencils. In the corner sat an old school backpack with frayed straps. Most of the clothes inside the plastic bin were already too small for Lily. I remembered Dennis complaining about how much her clothing cost him, and stared at a room that showed almost no evidence that money was being spent on her at all. I stood there for a long time because part of me refused to accept that this was where my son made his daughter sleep. A person can prefer minimalist decor, but this was not minimalism. This was deliberate deprivation inside a house filled with comfort. I took several photographs with my phone. Then I walked into Dennis and Patty's bedroom to continue looking for the inhaler. The contrast was almost insulting. Their bedroom was several times larger than Lily's. They had a large bed, full wardrobes, expensive furniture, and shopping bags from high-end stores sitting on a chair. A silk blouse still had an $800 price tag attached. Several pairs of designer shoes lined the closet. Dennis had a glass case displaying multiple watches. Patty had an entire shelf of handbags from luxury brands even I recognized. I thought of Lily's torn sneakers, and Dennis saying good shoes for children were a waste of money. Standing in that bedroom, I understood that the problem was no longer that Dennis lacked money. He simply did not want to spend it on his daughter. I finally found Lily's inhaler in a drawer in the master bathroom. I should have taken the medication and left, but as I passed Dennis's office, a stack of documents on his desk caught my eye. The top page had the logo of a cruise company. I had no intention of going through my son's private papers, but Dennis had told me he was leaving on a desperate business trip to save his finances, and now a cruise itinerary was sitting in plain view on his desk. I picked it up. It was a confirmation for a 14-day Caribbean cruise for Dennis and Patty. They had booked a luxury cabin, a beverage package, and several extras. The total cost was $18,500. The departure date was the same day he had dropped Lily at my house. I read the itinerary repeatedly because part of me still wanted there to be another explanation. Maybe it was an old trip. Maybe it was connected to business. Maybe the dates were different from what I thought. They were not. There was no stressful business trip. My son had lied to me, so I would watch his daughter for free, while he and his wife went on an $18,500 Caribbean cruise. And only minutes before leaving, he had stood in my driveway complaining that feeding Lily was helping destroy his finances. I photographed the entire cruise confirmation and returned it exactly where I found it. If that had been the only thing I discovered, I might have concluded Dennis was simply selfish and dishonest, a man willing to lie to avoid explaining a luxury vacation. But Lily's room, her fear of food, and the way Dennis had spoken about money told me there was more. In a lower desk drawer, I saw a folder labeled with Lily's name. Inside were documents related to a trust fund. I knew Patty's parents had left Lily money after they died, but I had never asked how much because I considered that her family's private business. The trust was worth more than $2.5 million. That alone surprised me. But what caught my attention were the withdrawals. Dennis and Patty had been taking approximately $8,000 every month. The descriptions on the requests were almost always similar. Specialized care, special dietary needs, health-related expenses, and developmental support for Lily. I stared at the phrase, special dietary needs, for a long time. Only hours earlier, Lily had told me that some mornings she ate a slice of dry bread and was instructed to drink water if she was still hungry. I continued reading. The withdrawals had been happening month after month. Some requests were even more detailed, claiming substantial spending for a customized nutritional program or in-home behavioral support. If Dennis and Patty were truly spending $8,000 a month on Lily, she should have had an excellent bedroom, properly fitting clothes, high-quality food, health care, and everything else she needed. Instead, I had just seen a mattress on the floor, torn sneakers, and a plastic bin serving as her closet. I was not a forensic accountant, but I understood numbers well enough to know that the money was going somewhere other than the child whose name was on the trust. I photographed the important pages and left the originals untouched. On the drive home, I tried to organize what I had learned. Dennis had lied about the trip. He was on a luxury cruise. He and Patty were withdrawing thousands of dollars every month from Lily's trust, while convincing her that feeding her cost too much. She slept in what looked like a storage room in a house filled with expensive belongings. I did not yet know whether this was simply greed or part of something more deliberate, but I knew I could no longer treat it as a private parenting disagreement. When I got home, I gave Lily the inhaler and did not tell her what I had seen. She did not need to carry the burden of adult financial wrongdoing. I made lunch and let her eat as much as she wanted. She ate a bowl of soup, half a sandwich, then asked if she was allowed to take an apple. I told her she did not need to ask. She still stood in front of the refrigerator for several seconds before taking one. That alone told me how deeply the pattern had been reinforced. At around 4 that afternoon, my phone rang. Dennis. He asked if Lily had been giving me trouble, then told me the business trip was extremely stressful and that he and Patty were moving from meeting to meeting. While he spoke, I could hear wind, waves, laughter, and the unmistakable sound of steel drum music in the background. At one point, somebody nearby called out a drink order. Dennis continued talking, as though he were sitting in an airport lounge. I did not expose him. I said Lily was fine and let him keep talking. That was when the conversation shifted. Dennis warned me that I needed to be careful with Lily because she had been having behavioral problems. According to him, she lied frequently, had angry outbursts, struggled to control her emotions, and sometimes became aggressive. He said he and Patty were exhausted and had begun considering professional help. I looked across the living room. Lily was sitting quietly with a book. During the time she had been with me, the only unusual thing I had observed was her fear of food. She had not screamed, broken anything, struck anyone, or behaved aggressively. I asked Dennis whether a doctor had evaluated her. He avoided the question and said several professionals had given advice and that everything was being handled. Then he warned me that if Lily told me weird stories, I should not believe everything because she had recently started exaggerating for attention. That statement made me even more suspicious. An innocent parent might complain that his child was difficult. But Dennis was actively trying to destroy Lily's credibility before I had even told him that she had said anything. He did not know I had been inside the house. He did not know I had seen the trust records. He did not know Lily had told me about the food scale. Yet he was already preparing me not to believe her. After the call, I became convinced that Dennis was building a story for a reason. He was not merely complaining about his daughter. He was deliberately portraying her as mentally unstable. I did not yet know why. That evening, after Lily went to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and reviewed every photograph on my phone. I zoomed in on the cruise dates, checked the passenger names, and read through the trust withdrawals again. Everything fit together in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. The luxury trip was happening at the exact time Dennis claimed to be in financial crisis. Money intended for Lily was being withdrawn regularly, while her actual living conditions showed almost no evidence of that spending. I tried to think back over Dennis's life and ask myself what I had missed. He had never been an easy child, but he had not been cruel in a way that made me imagine this future. He liked nice things, cared a great deal about status, and often spent more than I thought was wise. But I had always viewed those tendencies as ambition mixed with vanity. I had never imagined that preserving a wealthy image could become more important to him than feeding his own daughter. I also had to face a difficult truth about myself. For years, I had accepted Dennis's explanations too easily. When Lily wore old clothes, I believed children outgrew things quickly. When she looked thin, I assumed she was naturally small. When she stayed quiet at family dinners, I called her shy. I could not return to the past and correct those moments, but I could decide what I would do now. The next morning, I called Arthur Wallace. Arthur was an attorney I had known for many years. He had once worked as a prosecutor before entering private practice, and he was one of the few people I trusted to look at the situation legally rather than emotionally. I told him only that there was a serious problem involving my granddaughter and that I needed to speak face to face. Arthur came to my house that afternoon. I showed him the photographs of Lily's room, Dennis and Patty's bedroom, the cruise confirmation, and the trust statements. I told him what Lily had said about the food scale and described Dennis's phone call about her alleged aggression. Arthur barely interrupted. He asked for dates, details, and clarification when necessary, but otherwise he listened. When I finished, he told me there appeared to be two serious issues that were separate but closely connected. The first was potential child neglect and abuse. deliberately restricting food when the family had the means to provide it could become extremely serious, especially if Lily's health had been affected. The second was the trust. If Dennis and Patty were withdrawing money under false claims, particularly if they claimed they were paying for special nutritional or behavioral needs that did not exist, they could be facing financial fraud and misappropriation of a minor beneficiary's assets. Arthur asked who controlled the trust. I told him Dennis and Patty were Lily's legal guardians and could submit requests for expenses connected to her needs, although I did not know the exact oversight structure. Arthur said he would need to look at the documents, but what we already had was serious enough to justify further investigation. Before he left, he asked again about Dennis, describing Lily as mentally unstable. I repeated almost everything Dennis had said, including his warning that I should not believe Lily. Arthur's expression changed. He said that if Dennis was actively building a record of behavioral problems, there might already be some legal or medical process in motion. He would check. That night, I barely slept. I could hear Lily moving in the guest room and kept thinking about the possibility that after 5 days, if I did nothing, I might be expected to hand her back. I did not want to react recklessly, but I also could not accept returning her to a house where she slept on a mattress on the floor and was afraid to eat. The following morning, Arthur called. He told me to come to his office as soon as possible. When I arrived, he placed a set of documents in front of me. He had found something that explained why Dennis had suddenly begun portraying Lily as mentally unstable. Dennis and Patty had filed a petition seeking to place Lily in a state psychiatric facility. The application described her as aggressive, uncontrollable, dangerous to herself and others, and increasingly impossible to manage at home. It claimed they had tried multiple forms of support but had failed. I read the pages slowly. The girl described in those documents did not resemble the child staying in my house. Lily might have been anxious and cautious, but she was not violent. She had not destroyed property, attacked anyone, or screamed uncontrollably. One section particularly disturbed me. The filing described her as having disordered eating behavior and resistance to appropriate nutrition. I immediately thought of the digital scale. Dennis and Patty were taking the consequences of starving Lily and turning them into evidence that she was mentally ill. If she feared food or tried to hide food, instead of acknowledging that they had created those behaviors, they were documenting them as symptoms. Arthur then showed me the part concerning legal guardianship. If Lily were placed in a state-funded facility while Dennis and Patty remained her guardians, they could potentially continue controlling financial decisions related to her trust. The state could pay most of the cost of housing and treating Lily. Dennis and Patty could be freed from the daily responsibility of raising her, and yet they could still remain in a position to request money from the trust. That was when the entire plan became clear. They did not merely want to reduce the cost of raising Lily. They wanted Lily removed from their everyday lives while keeping access to the money in her name. If their plan worked, they would no longer have to buy her food, clothes, or care for her day after day, but they could continue presenting themselves as her legal guardians. The $8,000 monthly withdrawals might continue. The child the trust was created to protect could be confined to an institution, while the adults used her money to maintain their lifestyle. The 14-day cruise suddenly looked less like a vacation and more like a celebration. Dennis had originally asked me to watch Lily for 5 days, but the cruise was 14. Maybe he planned to extend her stay, using another excuse. Maybe he believed the psychiatric placement would happen before the cruise ended. We did not yet know every detail, but we no longer needed to wait. Arthur told me we had to move quickly. We could challenge the psychiatric placement, but we needed independent evidence that the behavioral claims were unreliable and that Lily's current living conditions were unsafe. He contacted Child Protective Services. A CPS worker interviewed Lily in a safe environment without Dennis or Patty present. I stayed out of the room because I did not want to influence her answers. Afterward, I was told that Lily described the food restrictions, the digital scale, the insults, the mattress, and her fear of asking for more food in a manner consistent with what she had already told me. A medical examination was also arranged. I hated the idea of turning Lily's days into a series of appointments with strangers, but independent medical evidence was necessary. The doctor found that Lily was underweight for what would normally be expected and showed nutritional concerns that required monitoring. Fortunately, there was no irreversible damage. That gave me some relief. It also made me angrier. Dennis and Patty could not claim they were following a medically prescribed diet because no doctor had ordered anything resembling what they were doing. Throughout those days, I tried to keep Lily's life as normal as possible. I did not tell her that her parents were being investigated. She was 9 years old and did not need to understand financial fraud, guardianship petitions, or psychiatrics placement hearings. I told her only that she might need to stay with me longer and that the adults were working through some important matters. Lily asked whether her parents would be angry. I told her she did not need to worry about that. The first day, she asked permission every time she wanted food. The second day, she still asked, but less nervously. By the fourth day, I was reading the newspaper when I saw Lily walk into the kitchen, open the refrigerator, take an apple, and walk away without asking me. It was such a small action that almost anybody else would have missed its significance. For me, it meant a great deal. For the first time, Lily had acted like a child who believed the food in the house was available to her. I pretended not to notice because I did not want to make her feel watched. Only after she returned to the living room did I look down and realize I'd been reading the same line of the newspaper repeatedly. Meanwhile, Arthur and the investigators began uncovering a clear financial pattern. The $8,000 withdrawals were made regularly under the explanation of Lily's special care. But they often appeared close to unrelated personal spending. Expensive club fees, luxury shopping, restaurant charges, and vacations. Some of the money moved into joint accounts and then disappeared into Dennis and Patty's credit card payments. Arthur described the arrangement as a kind of phantom drain, money being extracted for needs that existed on paper but not in reality. On paper, Lily was a child requiring thousands of dollars each month for specialized nutrition and behavioral care. In reality, she slept on a mattress on the floor, wore clothing that no longer fit, and was afraid to eat a second pancake. The more closely those two realities were compared, the more obvious the fraud became. Arthur also discovered that the withdrawals had increased over time. They began smaller, then grew as Dennis and Patty started describing Lily's needs as more complex. Some records referred to behavioral counseling, but there were no matching invoices from licensed professionals. That fit with the psychiatric petition. Dennis and Patty were creating a paper version of Lily that required increasingly expensive special care. I asked Arthur whether that meant they had planned everything from the beginning. He said, "We could not know the exact motive behind every earlier decision, but it was clear this had not developed overnight. The financial requests, behavioral claims, and psychiatric petition formed a pattern that appeared deliberate. The closer Dennis's planned return came, the more nervous I became. Arthur eventually proposed a strategy. We needed direct evidence of Dennis and Patty's intentions, particularly if they were trying to extract more money or openly admitted wanting to place Lily somewhere permanently while keeping control of her trust. Arthur coordinated with CPS and law enforcement to make sure everything was handled legally. The meeting would happen at my house. Dennis believed he was simply coming back from his supposed business trip to collect Lily. Investigators would be in my office nearby. Lily would not be present. I did not like the idea of acting in front of my own son, but Arthur explained that the best evidence would come from allowing Dennis and Patty to speak freely. I did not need to accuse them. I simply needed to let them believe I had started to see Lily as a burden too. On the day Dennis called to say they were returning, I acted unsurprised. He said the business trip had ended better than expected, so they could come back earlier. I thought about the 14-day cruise itinerary and wondered whether they had changed the booking or simply decided they needed to return. Before I began asking why a 5-day trip was becoming 2 weeks, I said nothing. Arthur and the officers arrived first. We reviewed the plan. A CPS worker took Lily out for ice cream and then to a safe location. She asked why she could not be home when her parents came. I told her the adults needed to talk first. That afternoon, the black SUV pulled into my driveway. Dennis and Patty got out with unmistakable suntans. Patty was carrying a new handbag I had never seen before. They looked far more relaxed than any couple returning from 5 days of desperate financial negotiations. Yet the moment Dennis entered my house, his voice became tired and serious. He asked whether Lily had caused me much trouble. I told him she was somewhere else for a short while and would return later. Then I followed the plan. I acted exhausted. I said taking care of Lily had been harder than I expected. I mentioned that she asked about food often, needed attention for her asthma, and seemed more dependent than I was used to. I never said she had behaved badly. I let Dennis fill in the rest. He did so immediately. He said I finally understood what he and Patty had been dealing with for years. According to Dennis, people who saw Lily for only a few hours always thought she was sweet, but living with her every day was different. He described her as draining money, time, and emotional energy. Patty joined in and said Lily had damaged their marriage because everything had to revolve around her. She complained that they could not travel freely, could not enjoy themselves, and always had to consider Lily's needs. I looked at Patty's tan and new handbag and forced myself to keep a neutral expression. I asked what they planned to do. Dennis told me they had found an excellent behavioral program where Lily could receive long-term professional care. He described it as an advanced facility with 24-hour supervision, therapy, and trained specialists. Arthur had already shown me the paperwork. It was a state psychiatric institution. I asked how long Lily would stay. Dennis said it depended on her progress. It could be months. It could be longer. Patty said if Lily improved, that would be wonderful. But if she had to remain there long term, that might also be for the best because they had already done everything they could. I asked how much it cost. Dennis said they needed approximately $10,000 immediately for evaluations, admissions paperwork, transportation, and initial fees. I knew that was another lie. The facility itself was state-funded. I asked why they could not use Lily's trust. Dennis hesitated and then said the trust had restrictions, and they wanted to preserve the money for Lily's future. If I had not seen the $8,000 monthly withdrawals, the answer might have sounded responsible, but I knew he was lying directly to my face. I asked whether sending Lily away was truly necessary. Patty answered first. She said some children were simply born in a way that made them a burden on everyone around them, and parents could not be expected to sacrifice their entire lives for a child who did not appreciate anything. Dennis did not disagree. He said Lily had already cost them too much money, too many years, and too much energy. If the program worked, he said, they could finally wash their hands of the problem. I sat across from my son and listened to him talk about the little girl who, days earlier, had asked whether she was allowed to eat breakfast. What hurt most was not even the language, it was the calmness. Dennis did not sound like an exhausted father whose child had a severe medical condition. He sounded like a businessman discussing how to eliminate an expense. I asked whether they would still control the trust if Lily entered the institution. Dennis said of course, they would still be her legal parents. Patty added that the money should at least compensate them for everything Lily had cost them. That was the statement Arthur had been waiting for. I asked Dennis whether $8,000 a month was not already enough. He visibly reacted, only slightly, but I saw it. He immediately asked what I was talking about. I pretended I was only guessing based on what he had said about high costs, and Dennis quickly changed the subject. Arthur had warned me not to rush, so I returned to the $10,000. Dennis said that if I really wanted to help the family, I could write a check that day. According to him, I had now seen firsthand how difficult Lily was and should understand why they needed to finish this process quickly. I asked whether my money would allow them to place her immediately. Dennis said almost immediately. Patty said if everything went smoothly, they might finally be able to breathe within a few days. That word stayed with me, breathe. They were talking about institutionalizing their 9-year-old daughter as if they were waiting to get rid of a piece of furniture that took up too much space. I stood up. Dennis clearly thought I was going to get my checkbook. Instead, I returned carrying a folder. I placed it on the table. The cruise confirmation was on top. Dennis's expression changed instantly. I slid it toward him, then placed down photographs of Lily's room, the mattress on the floor, the plastic clothing bin, the torn shoes, followed by pictures of the master bedroom, the luxury items, and finally the trust statements showing the regular $8,000 withdrawals. Patty immediately demanded to know how I had entered their house. I told her I had used the key Dennis gave me because his daughter had an asthma attack, and he had failed to send her inhaler. Dennis tried to turn the conversation toward privacy. I ignored him. I placed the psychiatric commitment petition on top of everything else. Both of them went silent. I told them I knew there had never been a business trip. I knew they had spent $18,500 on a Caribbean cruise while leaving Lily with me. I knew they had been her food and restricting what she ate while claiming thousands of dollars in specialized nutritional expenses. I knew her bedroom could not possibly be justified by $8,000 a month in care. And I knew the plan to place her in a state psychiatric facility was not based on dangerous behavior. It was based on wanting her gone while continuing to control the money attached to her. Dennis started saying, I did not understand the situation. Patty accused me of invading their privacy and insisted Lily really did have serious behavioral problems. Dennis claimed the withdrawals were completely legitimate, that raising a child involved costs I could not understand from a few photographs, and that Lily had lied about how she was treated. I asked why Lily did not have a real bed. Dennis said they were renovating her room. I asked why her clothes were too small, while Patty owned $800 blouses. Patty said children destroyed clothing too quickly. I asked why a child supposedly receiving thousands of dollars in specialized nutrition was terrified of eating pancakes. For a moment, neither of them answered. Then Dennis said Lily had food issues, and that was exactly why she needed psychiatric treatment. He tried to reverse the entire situation, turning Lily's fear of food into evidence that something was wrong with her, rather than the consequence of their behavior. I stopped arguing. I looked toward the office door. Arthur walked out first. Behind him came 2 police officers and a CPS investigator. Dennis stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. The expression on his face was not remorse. It was panic. Arthur informed them that the conversation had been recorded in accordance with the legal arrangements that had been made. The CPS worker told Dennis and Patty that Lily would not be returning home with them. The officers instructed both of them to remain seated while the next steps were explained. Patty immediately turned on Dennis. She said he handled the trust and filed the paperwork. Dennis fired back that Patty controlled Lily's meals and had pushed hardest for institutional placement. Within minutes, the 2 people who had just sat together calling their daughter a burden were desperately trying to blame each other. I stood there and felt something deeper than anger. Neither one asked where Lily was. Neither asked if she was safe. Neither asked if she was frightened. Their first instinct was to protect themselves. Soon afterward, both were placed in handcuffs. I watched my only son being led out of my house. I did not feel victorious. Dennis was still the boy I had once carried in my arms, the child I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had waited up for late at night, the man whose wedding I had proudly attended. No father imagines that one day he will watch his own son get arrested for what he did to his daughter. There was a moment when Dennis looked at me as though he expected me to do something. He did not say it, but I understood the look. Throughout his life, when Dennis got into trouble, I had often been the person who tried to help. When he damaged a car at 17, I helped pay for repairs. When his first job fell apart, I let him stay with me. When his early business struggled, I loaned him money. Perhaps some part of him still believed that no matter what happened, I would step in and protect him. But this time, the person who needed my protection was not Dennis. Whenever part of me wanted to think about my son's pain, I remembered Lily asking whether eating breakfast would get her in trouble. I remembered the storage-like bedroom. I remembered the torn shoes. I remembered her asking whether she would really be allowed 3 meals every day at my house. I knew I could not place a father's loyalty above the safety of a child. After Dennis and Patty were taken away, Arthur stayed with me for a while. He warned me that the arrest was only the beginning. There would be lawyers, CPS evaluations, financial investigations, custody hearings, and legal challenges. I was exhausted just hearing the list. But I did not hesitate. If protecting Lily required months of legal work, then months of legal work was what we would do. When Lily came home that evening, I did not tell her that her parents had been handcuffed. The CPS worker and therapist agreed that the situation should be explained in a way appropriate for her age. I told her only that her parents were dealing with serious adult problems and that she would be staying with me while everything was sorted out. Her first question was whether this was happening because she had told me about the food. That broke my heart, even after everything. Her first instinct was to blame herself. I told her clearly that none of it was her fault. Adults were responsible for their own choices. Telling the truth about how she had been treated was not wrong. Lily asked whether her parents hated her. I did not want to lie and say they could never have bad feelings, but I also did not want to add more pain. I told her that adults can make terrible choices, and children are not responsible for fixing them. The days that followed were complicated. Lily was sometimes relieved to stay with me and sometimes missed her parents. A child can still love people who mistreat her. I had to learn not to turn Dennis and Patty into monsters in every conversation. I did not want Lily to grow up believing she had to choose between truth and the fact that she once loved her parents. Her therapist told me my job was to provide safety. Understanding the rest would come with time. The investigation lasted for months and uncovered more than I had found. Financial specialists traced the trust withdrawals and showed that large amounts of the money had been spent on personal expenses, luxury club memberships, designer goods, expensive restaurants, vacations, and other purchases unrelated to Lily. The claims of special dietary needs had no supporting medical documentation. Doctors evaluating Lily found signs of inadequate nutrition requiring follow-up care. Investigators explained that they were not looking at one isolated withdrawal. They looked at patterns. Dennis could explain one $8,000 payment by claiming it covered multiple expenses. But when withdrawals repeatedly appeared just before club fees, luxury purchases, or vacation payments, the explanations became less credible. One month, money was withdrawn for nutritional care and in-home therapy, only days before Dennis paid an expensive membership fee. Another withdrawal supposedly meant for specialized equipment closely matched a series of luxury purchases made by Patty. One coincidence can happen, several can happen. But when the same pattern repeats month after month, it is no longer coincidence. The psychiatric petition also fell apart under scrutiny. There was no independent doctor confirming that Lily was dangerously violent. Most of the accusations came from Dennis and Patty themselves. Teachers were interviewed. They described Lily as quiet, sometimes tired, and occasionally anxious around food, but they had never witnessed serious aggression. One teacher remembered that Lily sometimes tried to save part of her lunch to take with her. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Now it fit the larger pattern. The more information surfaced, the more obvious it became that Lily had been surrounded by adults who had seen only individual pieces. Nobody had the full picture. Her teachers saw a quiet child. Doctors saw a small child. Neighbors saw a wealthy family. Friends saw Dennis and Patty dressed well and living in an expensive home. It was exactly that polished image that allowed the situation to remain hidden. CPS documented Lily's sleeping conditions, the food restrictions, her poorly fitting clothes, and her fear around eating. Arthur helped me obtain emergency guardianship, followed by proceedings for permanent custody. Dennis fought back. Through his attorney, he accused me of using the situation to gain control of Lily's $2.5 million trust. I had expected something like that. Arthur immediately proposed transferring the trust to independent management, so that even if I became Lily's legal guardian, I would have no unrestricted access to the money. I agreed without hesitation. I did not want control of the trust. I wanted Lily protected. That decision weakened Dennis's accusation considerably. If I had been trying to steal her money, I would not have voluntarily asked for an independent third party to control it. While the legal case continued, daily life with Lily became the part that mattered most to me. Giving her a room and 3 meals a day did not immediately undo years of fear. She still hid food. I found crackers in drawers, a banana in her backpack, and bread wrapped in tissues under her pillow. At first, I did not understand why she was doing it when the refrigerator was full. Her therapist explained that children who have experienced uncertainty around food often store it because having something nearby makes them feel safe. I was told not to punish her and not to take the food away in a manner that recreated the feeling of control she had experienced before. Instead, I needed to create such consistent access to food that eventually she would stop believing she had to hide it. So I did. I kept a basket of snacks in the kitchen where Lily could see it. She could take what she wanted. There were normal rules: no eating an entire bag of candy before dinner, but there was no weighing, no counting every bite, and no accusation that she was costing too much. Every morning, we ate together, sometimes eggs, sometimes cereal, sometimes toast, and sometimes Lily asked for pancakes. I discovered that she actually loved pancakes. That made the first breakfast even more painful to remember. Something she enjoyed had been turned into something frightening because she had learned that enjoying food too much could make an adult angry. At first, Lily always asked, "Can I have more?" Even when food was still sitting on the table for everyone, I always gave the same answer: "If you're still hungry, eat." Over time, she asked less often. After a few weeks, she could take another piece of toast without looking at me first. After a few months, she began leaving food on her plate when she was full, instead of forcing herself to finish or hiding it for later. One afternoon, I noticed half a sandwich sitting untouched on the kitchen table while Lily had already run outside. To anybody else, it was simply a child wasting part of lunch. To me, it was one of the greatest signs of progress. It meant she finally believed another meal would come. Another change appeared in the way Lily spoke. When she first arrived, she apologized constantly. She apologized if she dropped a pencil, if she asked for help with homework, if she wanted to watch television, and once even apologized for coughing. Her therapist told me that children who are repeatedly called burdens sometimes learn to make themselves as small and undemanding as possible. I began gently correcting her whenever she apologized for something that did not require an apology. If she spilled water, I handed her a towel and said accidents happen. If she needed help with homework, I told her helping was part of being her grandfather. If she was hungry, I did not ask why she was hungry again so soon. I wanted Lily to learn that having needs did not make her a problem. Some nights, she had nightmares. She did not always describe them, but sometimes she woke up and asked whether I would send her back to her parents. I told her nobody was going to move her anywhere without responsible adults, first making sure she was safe. I could not promise that nothing would ever change because the legal process was still underway, but I could promise she would not face it alone. 6 months after Dennis and Patty were arrested, I was granted permanent guardianship of Lily. When Arthur called with the news, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. It was the result I wanted, but it also meant my life at 70 had changed completely. I was no longer simply a grandfather who occasionally bought ice cream or attended birthdays. I was responsible for a 9-year-old child every day. I was not afraid of responsibility, but I did not pretend it was easy. I had to relearn things I had forgotten since Dennis was young: school schedules, doctor appointments, taught great teacher meetings, homework, seasonal clothing, bedtimes. Questions children ask when adults are completely unprepared. I had once managed hundreds of employees and complicated delivery schedules, but there were mornings when finding 2 matching socks for Lily felt harder than anything I had done in logistics. I converted the guest room into a real bedroom for her. I let Lily choose the color within reason. She chose bright yellow. We bought a proper bed, a warm blanket, a bookshelf, and a small desk near the window. We bought clothes that fit and new shoes. At the shoe store, Lily picked up a pair and immediately looked at the price tag. She asked whether they cost too much. I told her we did not need the most expensive shoes in the store, but she needed shoes that fit and would last. She still hesitated. Eventually, she chose a reasonably priced pair. On the drive home, I realized that even purchasing something necessary still made her worry that she was spending somebody else's money. When the room was finished, Lily stood in the doorway for a long time. I asked whether something was wrong. She told me she had never had a real room of her own. I remembered the mattress and storage bin in Dennis's house and had to turn away for a moment so she would not see how emotional I had become. Lily arranged books on the shelves, put her clothes in the closet, and spent nearly 10 minutes deciding where to place a small bedside lamp. Those things might seem ordinary to another child. For Lily, they mattered. She was not only decorating a bedroom, she was learning that the room was not going to disappear because she cost somebody money. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved toward its conclusion. The financial evidence was too strong to explain as accidental bookkeeping. The repeated withdrawals, false descriptions, unsupported care expenses, luxury travel, Lily's actual living conditions, and the recorded conversation at my house created a powerful chain of evidence. Dennis was eventually sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for crimes related to financial fraud, misappropriation of the trust, and wrongdoing connected to the abuse of his daughter. Patty also received a lengthy prison sentence. Assets that could be recovered were seized or liquidated to restore money to Lily's trust. When I heard Dennis's sentence, I did not feel happy. I thought I would feel relieved. Instead, I felt a complicated grief. Dennis was still my son. No sentence erased the memories of holding him as a baby, walking him into school on his first day, or feeling proud when he graduated. But those memories did not erase what he had done to Lily, either. I came to understand that loving somebody does not mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the most responsible form of love is refusing to help someone escape what they have done. The luxury SUV was sold. The designer belongings disappeared. The expensive house was eventually liquidated. I did not celebrate any of it. I only saw the bitter irony. Dennis had used those things as proof that he was successful. In the end, they helped prove how absurd his claims of poverty had been. A man could not reasonably claim his daughter needed to eat dry bread because money was so tight while simultaneously spending tens of thousands on cars, watches, clothing, and vacations. Lily's trust was transferred to independent management. I could not simply withdraw money as I wished, and I preferred it that way. The trust belonged to Lily. Her maternal grandparents had created it for her education, health, and future. The role of the adults around her was to protect it, not treat it as personal income. As life slowly became more stable, I began to think about the role money had played in the entire tragedy. Dennis had constantly talked about costs, burdens, debt, and everything Lily supposedly took from him. Yet, in financial terms, Lily had a trust large enough to provide excellent care. The problem had never been lack of money. The problem was that Dennis and Patty wanted the money meant for Lily without wanting Lily. That was the hardest truth to accept. If the family had truly been poor, if everybody had eaten cheaply and worn old clothes, the story would have been different. I had lived through difficult financial years when Dennis was young. I understood that parents sometimes had to say no, but I had never eaten expensive meals while forcing my son to survive on dry bread so I could save money for myself. I had never bought a luxury watch and then told him he did not deserve shoes that fit. Dennis had not been forced by circumstances. He had chosen. My life with Lily gradually settled into a rhythm I never expected at 70. I drove her to school in the mornings. On the way, she talked about friends, teachers, projects, and small events that adults might consider unimportant. I learned not to turn every conversation into a lesson. Sometimes a child just wants to tell you that somebody dropped a pencil box or that the class had cupcakes. In the afternoons, Lily did homework at her new desk or sat on the porch reading. Eventually, she started asking if friends could visit. The first time she asked, I realized it was another milestone. She had rarely wanted anybody to visit her old house because her room looked like a storage area, and Patty disliked children touching things. Now Lily was beginning to feel that my house was her house too. I learned how to tie her hair. I was terrible at it. The first time I tried, Lily looked at herself in the mirror and laughed so hard that I started laughing too. A neighbor later showed me a simpler way. Those moments had nothing to do with court cases, fraud, or trust funds, but they were the moments that convinced me Lily's new life was real. Sometimes I felt too old to begin raising a child again. My knees hurt when I crawled under the bed looking for something she had lost. I did not understand half the school apps teachers wanted me to use. There were mornings when I missed the quiet life I had expected in retirement. But every time that feeling appeared, I remembered that Lily had been taught to see another person's tiredness as proof that she was a burden. I never wanted her to look at my exhaustion and conclude that her existence had caused it. So I learned to speak carefully. If I was tired, I said I was tired because I was old or because I had done too much that day. I did not say I was tired because of Lily. If I needed a break, I said we would rest and continue later. Words mattered more than I had realized. Dennis and Patty had used words for years to shape how Lily saw herself. I wanted my words to do the opposite. Her therapist reminded me that recovery was not a straight line. There were weeks of obvious progress followed by sudden returns to old fears. Once, I casually mentioned that the electricity bill was higher than usual. Lily immediately started turning off every light in the house and asked whether she was costing me too much. I had to explain that adults talking about bills did not mean a child was in danger of losing her home. Another time, when I bought her a winter coat, she insisted her old one was still usable, even though the sleeves were several inches too short. I understood what she was doing. She was trying to avoid becoming an expense. I did not force her to choose something expensive. I simply explained that clothes fitting properly was a normal need, not a reward. Those moments showed me that Dennis and Patty had not only starved Lily physically. They had also taught her that every need had to be justified. Food, clothes, medication, a bedroom, attention. All of it had become something Lily believed she had to earn. I wanted to change that, but I knew one conversation would never be enough. The only way was to let her experience stability for long enough that the new reality became stronger than the old one. The kitchen remained the place where I could see the change most clearly. There was no digital scale on my table. Nobody weighed Lily's food. Nobody told her what breakfast cost. If she was hungry, she ate. If she was full, she stopped. It was that simple. Yet for a child who had once believed every bite created debt, simplicity itself was healing. About 6 months after Lily officially came to live with me, she asked for pancakes and bacon on a Saturday morning. I made almost exactly the same breakfast I had served on that first morning. When I set the plate down, I remembered the way she had once shrunk back in her chair, eyes filling with tears, because she believed eating too much might bring punishment. This time she did not hesitate. Lily picked up the maple syrup, poured it over the pancakes, and started telling me about a school project. She ate while talking. She laughed about something one of her classmates had done. She never once looked at me to check whether she had eaten too much. She did not try to save the last pancake for lunch. She knew lunch would come. I sat across from her drinking coffee and realized that real wealth could look very different from what Dennis had spent his life chasing. My son thought wealth meant a new SUV, expensive watches, designer clothes, cruises, club memberships, and the ability to appear successful in front of other people. To preserve that image, he had been willing to turn his own daughter into a source of income and force her into deprivation. Lily taught me another definition. For a child, wealth can be as simple as knowing dinner will appear on the table. It can mean having a warm bed, shoes that fit, a room she knows is hers, and an adult who believes her when she says she is afraid. Safety does not need to sparkle. It can be a box of cereal in the cabinet that a child knows will still be there tomorrow. It can be an inhaler stored where it belongs. It can be a winter coat that fits without anybody reminding the child of its price every time she wears it. It can be leaving half a sandwich unfinished because she knows dinner is guaranteed. Those things sound too ordinary to be victories. That is exactly why they matter. Children deserve ordinary things. Lily had been denied that normality by two adults who cared so much about maintaining a glamorous lifestyle that they began to see their daughter as an expense to be managed. Now she had ordinary mornings. And after everything that happened, I no longer believed ordinary was small. I used to think wealth meant having enough money not to worry. Dennis thought wealth meant making other people believe you were successful. Lily taught me that real wealth might simply mean being safe enough that a child does not have to calculate whether she should save half a pancake for lunch. That was what I wanted her to have, not luxury, not image, not status, just the certainty that she was protected, fed, heard, and allowed to exist without apology. There are times when I still think about the day Dennis brought Lily to my house. I remember the polished black SUV, the expensive watch on his wrist, and the torn shoes on his daughter's feet. The signs had been directly in front of me, but I did not understand them until Lily sat before a plate of pancakes and began to cry. For a while, I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner. I wondered whether I could have stopped things months earlier, if I had asked more questions about her shoes, if I had paid closer attention during family meals, or if I had visited her bedroom before that day. But those questions do not have answers. I cannot change the months or years that already happened. I cannot turn myself into a man who knew everything, just because I know the truth now. The only thing I can control is what I did after I learned. I could have called Dennis that first morning, listened to him, tell me Lily exaggerated, and accepted the explanation, because trusting an adult can feel easier than believing a frightened child. I could have told myself that the way parents raise their children is not a grandfather's business. I could have returned Lily after 5 days and gone back to my quiet retirement. If I had done that, perhaps the psychiatric placement would have gone through, perhaps Lily would have been institutionalized, while Dennis and Patty continued withdrawing money from her trust. Maybe years later, people would have looked at her medical records and seen only a troubled child, without ever knowing who created the trouble in the first place. I hate thinking about that possibility, but it taught me why believing a child can matter so much. Lily did not present me with legal evidence that first morning. She cried in front of pancakes and told me a story. I could have decided she misunderstood her parents. Instead, I looked around and asked whether what she said matched reality. It matched too well. A child in clothes too small, while her father wore designer brands. Torn shoes beside a new luxury SUV. A storage room bedroom inside a house filled with expensive furniture. Dry bread compared to paperwork claiming specialized nutrition. $8,000 withdrawals compared to a mattress on the floor. An $18,500 cruise compared to a story about crushing debt. Any single detail might have been explained. Together, they told only one story. I also came to understand that cruelty does not always look the way people expect. Dennis did not live in a broken-down house. He did not stumble drunk through the yard. He did not appear to neighbors like the kind of father people would immediately suspect. He dressed well. He spoke politely. He knew how to look successful. Patty did too. That polished appearance helped hide what was happening to Lily. There was a lesson from my old career that suddenly applied to family life. Do not judge what somebody claims they are providing. Look at the actual result. Dennis claimed he spent thousands caring for Lily. The result was a child afraid to eat. He claimed he was paying for behavioral care. The result was a lack of credible medical records. He claimed to be financially desperate. The result was luxury travel and expensive belongings. I did not need to understand every thought in Dennis's head to know the outcome was wrong. As time passed, Lily mentioned her parents less often, although sometimes she asked unexpected questions. Once, she asked whether her father had ever loved her. I did not want to answer for Dennis's emotions. I told her that people can say they love someone and still make choices that cause terrible harm, and children are not responsible for explaining why adults behave that way. She asked whether Dennis would come back when he got out of prison. I told her that by then, many adults and the legal system would decide what was safe, and she would never have to handle that situation alone. I knew the answer could not erase her fear, but at least it told her the future was no longer controlled entirely by Dennis. For a while, I worried that Lily would grow up believing her entire identity was the story of what had happened to her. I did not want the abuse, the trust fund, or the court case to become the only story she carried. So, as time passed, we talked less about Dennis during ordinary days. We talked about school, books, friends, foods she liked, places she wanted to visit, things she wanted to learn. Lily began to enjoy drawing. I bought her paper and a set of colored pencils. At first, she asked whether they cost too much. After several months, questions about prices became less frequent. Her yellow bedroom slowly filled with drawings taped to the walls, something her old room had never contained. Every time I passed the hallway and saw them, I thought about the difference between existing and living. At Dennis's house, Lily technically had somewhere to sleep, but nothing about that space told her she belonged. At my house, she began leaving signs of herself everywhere. Books on tables, a jacket over a chair, colored pencils in the living room, shows near the front door. Those things occasionally annoyed the part of me that had spent years keeping a quiet, tidy house. Then I realized that the small mess was evidence Lily no longer believed she had to become invisible. My retirement also became very different from what I had expected. I thought I would spend more time fishing, reading, visiting friends, and living quietly. Instead, my schedule filled with school events, dentist appointments, homework, grocery shopping, and arguments about bedtime. There were moments when I missed my old silence. But I did not regret the change. That silence had existed partly because I did not know what my granddaughter was enduring. Now my house contained footsteps, laughter, music, and occasionally Lily complaining because I did not understand something that every child her age apparently considered obvious. I preferred those sounds. 1 year after that first morning, Lily asked for pancakes again. This time she wanted to help make them. I showed her how to mix the batter, heat the pan, and wait for the small bubbles before flipping. The first pancake burned a little. The second one came out crooked. The third looked almost perfect. Lily put all three on a plate and laughed at the different shapes. There was no fear in the kitchen. I watched her eat a pancake she had made herself and remembered the girl who once asked whether she was allowed to finish breakfast. The difference had nothing to do with money. I did not own a nicer home than Dennis. I did not drive a more expensive car. I could not give Lily the luxury lifestyle that filled advertisements. What I gave her was stability. In the end, I think that is what children need most. Not a giant house, but a home where nobody uses the roof over their head as a threat. Not expensive food, but the certainty that they will be fed. Not designer clothes, but clothes that fit. Not a multi-million-dollar trust fund, but adults who value the child more than the money attached to her name. Dennis had owned nearly everything that looked like success. He had simply failed to understand the most basic responsibility beneath all of it. I lost a son in a way no father ever wants to experience. But at the same time, I gave Lily another chance to have a real childhood. I do not pretend the future will be perfect. She still carries wounds that time and therapy will have to address. I am not getting younger. There will be difficult days. But Lily now has a different foundation. She knows she can say when she is hungry. She knows she can speak when she is afraid. She knows an adult can listen without punishing her. Most importantly, she is learning that her value is not measured by how much money someone has to spend on her. That first morning began with a plate of pancakes, but what I discovered was never really about breakfast. The food was only the first visible sign of a system of control and exploitation that had been operating inside my own family. If Lily had not cried, perhaps I would have taken longer to notice. If her inhaler had not been forgotten, perhaps I would not have entered the house and seen her room. If the cruise documents had not been sitting on the desk, Dennis might have continued lying for much longer. But eventually, all the pieces appeared at the same time. I had spent my entire career in logistics, a profession built around making sure things went to the right place, at the right time, without disappearing along the way. The most important thing I ever had to protect had nothing to do with shipments or inventory. It was a little girl who had been made to feel by the people responsible for protecting her that she did not belong anywhere. I cannot give Lily back the years she spent frightened, but I can make sure the next part of her life is not defined by a digital food scale in her old kitchen. That scale will never appear in my house. Not because I hate a kitchen appliance, but because of what it represented to Lily. It represented every bite being measured, every need being judged, every moment of hunger becoming an accusation. In my kitchen, pancakes are measured by how many people are eating, not by how many grams a child is allowed. If Lily wants another one, she eats another one. If she is full, she leaves it. If she eats more one day than another, nobody records it. That may sound too ordinary to count as a victory, but that is exactly why it is one. Children deserve ordinary things. Lily had been denied them by two adults, so consumed with maintaining a glamorous life that they began treating their daughter like an expense that needed to be reduced. Now she has ordinary mornings. After everything that happened, I no longer consider ordinary small. I once thought being wealthy meant having enough money not to worry. Dennis thought wealth meant convincing other people you had succeeded. Lily taught me that true wealth can be much simpler. It can mean being safe enough that a child never has to calculate whether she should save half a pancake for lunch. That is what I want for her. Not luxury, not status, not appearances, just the certainty that she is protected, fed, heard, and allowed to exist without apologizing for it. And if there is one thing I learned from everything that happened, it is this. When a child tells you she is afraid, do not listen only to the story adults have created around her. Look at what is actually in front of you, because sometimes the truth is not hidden in complicated documents or dramatic confessions. Sometimes it is sitting there in a pair of torn shoes, beside a luxury car, in an empty bedroom inside an expensive house, or in the terrified eyes of a little girl staring at a plate of pancakes that should have brought her nothing but happiness. I saw that look once. I will never forget it. But what matters more is that Lily no longer has to wear it.